Midterms had drained the life out of me, so I wandered into the oldest section of the university library, searching for a place untouched by the usual chaos of cramming students. The main floor was suffocating. Low chatter, the clatter of keyboards, the scratch of highlighters bleeding over textbook pages. I needed quiet, real quiet, the kind that only existed in places most people forgot. The basement level had always been unsettling. I had only been down there once before when I first toured the campus. I remembered the way the air felt heavier, how the overhead lights buzzed slightly, how the smell of old pages clung to the walls like something alive. No one studied down there, and no one ever mentioned why. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I wasn't alone. The librarian sat behind the front desk, his gaze barely lifting from whatever it was he had been reading. He looked tired, no, exhausted. Not in the way students were, but in the way someone got when they had seen the same thing happen too many times to care. He exhaled a breath through his nose when I passed, a sigh so slight it was almost imperceptible, but it prickled the hairs on my arms. Rows of tall shelves stretched out before me, filled with books no one had touched in years. The labels were yellowed, the covers worn and cracked. It was colder down here than it should have been. I moved between the aisles, dragging my fingers lightly over the spines. The books down here didn't look like the ones upstairs. They were heavier, older, bound in materials that made me hesitate to touch them. Then my hand landed on it. The book's leather cover was rough, the kind that felt almost organic under my fingertips like dried skin. Its spine was unmarked. There was no title, no author, just a deep brown binding that darkened near the edges, as if it had been handled too many times to count. It was heavier than it looked. I turned it over, flipping through the first few pages. No table of contents. No introduction. Just thick parchment pages filled with text that looked handwritten, some in ink that had faded into sepia, others in fresher, darker strokes. Notes lined the margins, scribbled in different styles, different hands. Some frantic, some precise. Then I saw it. A message scrawled in the center of the page, different from the others. Short. Urgent. Don't check this out. You won't come back. I stopped breathing. The handwriting, every loop, every slight slant, every imperfection was mine. But I had never seen this book before. The ink was dry. It had been written some time ago, but I didn't remember doing it. I didn't remember ever coming down here before. My stomach twisted as I traced my fingertips over the words, as if touching them would somehow bring back a memory that didn't exist. Had I written it in my sleep? Had I been here before and forgotten? The thought was absurd, but I suddenly didn't want to be holding the book anymore. I closed it and carried it to the front desk, tried to ignore the way the weight of it seemed to settle in my arms like something pressing down. The librarian didn't seem surprised when I placed it in front of him. He barely even glanced at it before shaking his head, slow and deliberate. The words came flatly, without emotion, as if they had been said 100 times before. You've borrowed that before. I felt the air leave my lungs. I tried to form a response, to ask him what he meant, but the moment my lips parted, a sound cracked through the silence. The library doors. They slammed shut behind me, the force of it rattling the glass. The lights above flickered. The weight of the book was still in my hands. I hadn't even noticed that I had never let go. The doors didn't move. I pressed against them, hands flat against the glass, but they didn't give. Not locked, not jammed, just stuck. The way something in a dream is stuck when you try to run, but your legs won't move. The library behind me had gone silent. I had never noticed the constant ambient noise before. The soft hum of the lights, the distant rustle of students shifting in their seats, the occasional page turning. Now it was all gone. I turned, and the emptiness pressed against me like a held breath. No students, no staff, just rows and rows of books, stretching out farther than I remembered. It should have been comforting the way libraries always were, quiet, predictable, safe, but something was wrong. The air had weight to it, thick and unmoving. I looked down at the book in my hands, still clutched tightly against my chest. I hadn't meant to keep holding it. I should have left it on the counter. I opened it again, flipping to the page with my message. The words were gone. In their place, a new sentence had appeared, written in the same unmistakable handwriting as before. My handwriting. You left something behind. My pulse spiked, a cold rush spreading through my chest. I flipped through more pages, searching for answers, but the text blurred as I turned them, words shifting like ink dissolving in water. The library creaked. I looked up. The shelves were different. The layout had changed. The aisles stretched longer than they should have, their rows twisting deeper into the basement level than I remembered. The ceiling arched higher, impossibly high, the lights barely illuminating the upper shelves. My steps echoed as I moved, bouncing back at me from angles that didn't make sense. The librarian was gone. I walked to the front desk, expecting to see the worn wooden surface, the outdated computer, the stack of books waiting to be shelved. Instead, I found an old filing cabinet, the kind with thick brass handles, its drawers slightly ajar. My name was on one of the labels. I reached out and pulled it open. Inside, a stack of checkout records, pages and pages of them, filled with the same title repeated over and over. The book in my hands. I had checked it out before. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. Dates stretching back years, long before I ever attended this university. My own signature scrawled at the bottom of each slip, inked into the past like a contract I didn't remember signing. I hadn't just borrowed this book before. I had never stopped. A sound broke the silence. A whisper, not words, just the faint rustling of pages turning, the flutter of parchment shifting in the air. The books around me weren't still. Some had cracked open on their own, their pages flipping as though caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. Others slid slightly forward, dislodging from their places on the shelves, leaning toward me. I took a step back. The filing cabinet was gone. In its place, more bookshelves, stretching endlessly into the dark corners of the library. The layout was shifting again. I turned too quickly, disoriented, my heart pounding. The librarian stood in front of me. He hadn't been there a second ago. His face was weary, as though he had aged in the short time since I had last seen him. The deep circles under his eyes weren't just exhaustion. They were resignation. Like he had done this before. Like he had seen this happen too many times. His mouth moved. I heard the words in my head before the sound reached my ears. You never listen. The librarian was gone again. I wasn't sure if he had walked away, disappeared, or if I had simply blinked and he had ceased to exist. The silence left in his absence was suffocating. I turned back toward the entrance, or where the entrance should have been. I needed to leave. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin like the weight of unseen hands. Every instinct screamed that I wasn't supposed to be here. But the library had shifted again. The rows of bookshelves no longer aligned the way they had before. The path I had taken minutes ago was gone. In its place, a corridor stretched into the distance, lined with towering shelves that curved slightly, unnaturally, as if bending toward me. I forced myself forward. With each step, the floor seemed softer, like I was walking on something that resisted just slightly before giving way. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. I glanced down at the book still clutched in my hands. The pages had changed. The message I had seen before, "You left something behind," was gone. In its place, new words had appeared, written in my own uneven scrawl. They never come back. But you already know that. My fingers tightened around the cover. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything. Something shifted in the corner of my vision. I turned sharply, heart hammering. The shelf had moved again. A narrow passage had appeared where none had been before, a dimly lit hallway leading deeper into the library's impossible architecture. I needed to find something familiar. A staircase, a door, even a desk. Anything that would prove I was still in the real world. The study rooms. They were always near the back, tucked away in the farthest corners of the library. If the layout still followed some logic, I could find my way there, reorient myself, figure out how to get out. I moved quickly, trying not to focus on the way the shelves seemed to lean closer as I passed, or the way the books sometimes shifted just slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. The study room door was open. Inside, it looked just as I remembered, a simple table, a chair, a single lamp casting dull light across the walls, and a mirror. It stretched across the far wall, the kind meant to make the small space feel larger. But it didn't. It made it feel wrong, because my reflection wasn't quite right. I stepped forward. The other me did the same. But there was something off. The eyes were wrong. Hollowed out. Dark, sunken pits where there should have been tired college student exhaustion. The skin was stretched too tight, the cheekbones sharp beneath the surface. Deep scars ran along the reflection's face, jagged lines that I reached up to touch instinctively. Except in the mirror, the movement wasn't identical. The other me was faster. I went still. The reflection tilted its head slightly. The mouth opened. There was no sound, but I knew what it was saying. You need to put the book back. Now. I couldn't breathe. The reflection's lips kept moving, repeating the words, over and over, silent but urgent. Then the light in the room flickered just once, and my reflection stepped forward. Not me, not my actual body, just the thing in the mirror. I staggered back. My heel hit the chair, sending it scraping against the floor. The reflection was still stepping closer, one slow, deliberate movement at a time. The light flickered again. When it came back, the mirror was empty. Something rustled behind me. I turned so quickly my vision blurred. The room was empty, but the door was open wider than before. And something had changed outside. The bookshelves weren't still anymore. They were moving, shifting, not physically, not in any way that could be seen directly. But the gaps between them were changing. Shadows stretched in ways they shouldn't. And I could hear something. Not footsteps, not breathing. Whispers. My own voice, calling to me from the dark. The whispers followed me through the shifting aisles, slithering between the shelves like fingers brushing the back of my neck. My own voice, distorted and stretched, muttering words I couldn't quite make out. The library no longer made sense. Paths that should have led to the exit now twisted into unfamiliar corridors. Walls stretched impossibly high, and shadows deepened in ways that suggested depth where there shouldn't be any. I moved faster, gripping the book tightly. The leather binding felt warmer now, almost pulsing against my fingers. I didn't want to look at it. A doorway appeared at the end of the corridor, one I hadn't seen before. Beyond it, an open space. A vast chamber unlike any part of the library I had ever encountered. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of paper and something else, something older. Shelves lined the walls, but they didn't hold books. They held people. Figures stood in perfect rows, stretching into the distance, their forms covered in a fine layer of dust. I took a step forward. The dust shifted. The figures were me. Hundreds of them, each one identical, yet slightly wrong. Some were thinner, their faces gaunt, hollow. Others bore scars in places that didn't exist on my body. A few had expressions frozen in silent horror, their lips slightly parted as if caught in the moment before a scream. The dust on their faces suggested they had been standing here for a long time. Something moved beside me. The librarian. He had appeared without a sound, watching me with those tired eyes that seemed to hold the weight of years. The figures didn't move. They remained eerily still, their presence pressing against me like the walls of a closing room. Then the dust stirred. One by one, the figures began to turn. Their heads moved first, shifting toward me with slow, unnatural precision. Then their lips parted, and I knew what they were going to say before I heard it. The words didn't come from their mouths. They came from the air itself. A whisper in my own voice. Put it back before it takes you to. The book felt heavier. The leather binding shifted slightly, stretching, as if something inside was breathing. I forced myself to move, to step back, to break away from the silent army of myself, standing in rows like forgotten statues. But my legs felt slow. The dust clung to my skin. And I had this sinking realization that if I stayed here too long, I wouldn't leave at all. The book would not leave my hands. I tried to drop it, to pry my fingers free, to fling it to the ground, but my grip was fused to the leather cover. It pulsed against my skin, the subtle rise and fall of something that should not have been alive. The rows of figures shuddered. Their dust-coated forms trembled, heads tilting at unnatural angles. Hollow eyes locked onto me, as if my struggle had woken something inside them. The nearest one moved first. Its skin rippled, shifting, reshaping. My own reflection faded, replaced by a familiar face, a girl I had taken an English class with last semester. She had borrowed my pen once. Had I ever returned it to her? Another figure stepped forward, its features melting and reforming into my professor. The one who had given me an extension on my final paper. The one whose name I couldn't recall. More and more of them changed. Classmates, friends, people I had seen in passing, all emerging from the dust, their expressions blank and accusing. Not strangers. They had been here before. They had borrowed this book before. The library groaned. Shelves twisted. Shadows deepened into places where light should have reached. I turned to run, but the librarian blocked my way. He was still, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for me to finally understand. The figures in the rows lurched closer. My memories flickered, skipping like a damaged film reel. I had borrowed this book before. The records proved it. The librarian's exhaustion confirmed it. Each time, I had come to the same conclusion too late. I had dropped the book before. I had tried to run before. And then, it reset. Everything. I had walked back into my life, empty-handed, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu that never quite settled. The people I had forgotten faded from my world, swallowed by the library, leaving only shadows where their names should have been. The figures reached for me. The book in my hands trembled, pages fluttering. One final message scrawled itself across the parchment, written in my own frantic handwriting. This time, don't forget. The librarian's desk stood a few feet away. Beside it, a fireplace flickered, flames licking hungrily at the air. I had always been there. The book in my hands thrashed, resisting. The figures screamed, their voices overlapping in a distorted wail. I moved before I could hesitate. The leather was hot against my palms as I hurled the book into the fire. The moment it hit the flames, the room convulsed. The figures shrieked, their voices cracking apart. The shelves groaned, shifting violently as the entire library trembled. A door appeared behind the desk, the first real exit I had seen. And then, I remembered. Everything. Every time I had been here before. Every time I had walked away, empty-handed, my mind wiped clean. The faces of the lost. The people I had unknowingly let slip away. The library was collapsing. The shadows were swallowing the rows. The shelves twisting into nothingness. I ran for the door. The last thing I saw was the librarian, standing motionless as the fire consumed the book, his tired eyes watching me go. Then, I was outside, not in the basement of the library, not in the building at all, but standing beneath the night sky, the cool air sharp against my skin. The weight of everything I had forgotten pressed down on me. I knew the names now, the people who had disappeared, and I knew what I had to do, because somewhere in some other forgotten corner of the world, another book waited to be borrowed. And not everyone made it back. Morning arrived without warning. No slow return to consciousness. No hazy memory of how I got here. One moment, there had been the fire, the screaming, the endless rows of figures stretching into nothingness. And the next, my eyes opened to the familiar ceiling of my dorm room. The weight of my own body felt strange, as if I had been gone for much longer than a single night. I sat up. The room was exactly as I had left it. My desk, cluttered with textbooks and notebooks filled with midterm notes. My phone, sitting on the nightstand, the battery half drained. My clothes scattered carelessly over my chair. Nothing was wrong, but something was missing. The book. It was nowhere in sight. Not on my desk, not on the floor, not tucked into my bag. The old leather, the shifting pages, the impossible weight of it, it was all gone. I should have felt relieved. I didn't. The burn on my palm was faint, but unmistakable. A thin, ghostly mark, barely visible unless I turned my hand a certain way in the light. The exact size and shape of where my fingers had clutched the book's cover. I ran my thumb over it. The skin was smooth, unbroken. Healed. Had it really happened? I swung my legs over the bed, standing too fast. The blood rushed to my head, making the edges of my vision blur. A headache throbbed at the base of my skull, an ache that felt old, like it had been lingering just out of reach for days. My laptop was still open on my desk, the same essay, I had been working on before all of this started staring back at me from the screen. The cursor blinked, waiting, but I couldn't sit down. Not yet. I had to check. The library was exactly where it had always been. Students crowded inside, heads bent over books, laptops glowing. The air hummed with soft voices and the occasional scrape of chairs against the floor. Everything was normal. The basement level should have been ahead, through the double doors, down a narrow stairwell. But as I approached, I felt it before I saw it. The entrance was gone. Not closed. Not locked. Just missing. A plain stretch of wall stood where the stairwell should have been. No doors, no signs, no indication that anything had ever been there at all. I turned, scanning for something, anything that felt off. But the librarians at the front desk were the same ones I had always seen, shuffling books, stamping returns, answering quiet questions from students. The old man wasn't there. I knew he wouldn't be. The records were gone. The book had never existed. The shelves had never moved. The people who had disappeared had never been students here at all. And yet, the burn on my palm was still there. I left the library without speaking to anyone. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Classes, familiar faces, laughter in the dining hall. Everything continued as if nothing had ever happened. As if the world had simply reset, shifting back into place without a ripple. But I could feel it. A presence just out of reach. A shadow pressing at the edges of my mind, waiting for me to acknowledge it. That night, exhaustion settled deep in my bones. My bed felt impossibly soft, pulling me under as soon as I lay down. And just as I drifted off, somewhere in the darkness, a book slammed shut.